make managerial decisions on large, risky projects where you're investing a lot of time and the returns are going to be long-term, right? It's not going to be just like tomorrow we suddenly have balloons all over Africa and everyone has internet and everyone's searching on Google. So the way they can come up with the decision, the way they make the decision is they kind of have a two-step process. The first step is, does this idea make sense? And if so, let's put a bit of money into it and let's start experimenting. We're not going to invest a ton of money. No one's going to be working full-time on it. We're going to have a bunch of people part-time on it, and we're going to start experimenting. And then as we see more and more potential, we'll then move it to the next level of decision-making where there's a much bigger restriction and there's a much bigger investment of time, money. People are going to start working full-time. And so the way they made the decision of whether or not they're going to invest in this project is they have those two steps. First, you kind of have a low threshold at the beginning because you really need a lot of experimentation before you realize the potential of a project, and then when you start experimenting, you can then figure out whether or not you're going to make a bigger investment. And so that's kind of how they make the decision. And the reason they do that is, I don't know how many people have taken Adam Grant's class. Adam Grant calls it escalation of commitment. And what that means is that if you start having all these people working full-time on a specific project early on and you invest a lot of time and energy, it becomes, you kind of escalate your commitment, which means that you basically are like, okay, I just invested, 1 year of my time, I put 5 people on it, I invested X million dollars. It's much harder for you to cut the cord and turn down a project that's not working. And then, you have all these people who are working full-time on this project. Do you fire them? What do you do with them? So there's all these other consequences of how so these decisions are not just like, are a little more complicated than they seem on the surface. And so that's the way Google came about kind of making that decision. And it's basically a decision about how do you kind of think about risky projects. And then that's a managerial standpoint. On a personal standpoint, you also make, as an individual, a lot of risky decisions, right? So or decisions that are important. So you'd make a decision over which job to take, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of you guys in the next couple of years are going to be making a decision on which job to take. And so I'll talk a bit about myself and how I kind of went about that. So I worked at a statistics company, a company that builds statistical software, and the software is mainly used by statisticians and derivative traders, financial analysts. And then I worked at a startup founded by Penn alums that has done very, very well, called Ampush. And what they do is they build they basically run marketing for companies. So they'll build software and analytics to help you optimize the way in which you advertise on Google, the way in which you advertise on Facebook, the whole creative part, the image, the text, how do you kind of design that. And then I went into tech investing. I worked at a company called Silver Lake Partners. They invest in large technology companies. And it was a great experience, great people. It's a private equity job, which according to Wharton is like amazing, right? And then it was a great time, very talented people. And I kind of had the decision of like, do I stay with? I started working at VenturePact on the side with my co-founder, and I had to make a decision. Like, do I go with Silver Lake, which according to like the standard way in which you think of life and the way in which the standard structure, you say like, oh, that's perfect, right? Because you go to the rule is you go to, you come to Wharton, you go to banking, then you go to private equity, and you get a great job, and you're like happy. Like that's like, and so like I had reached that point of like where everyone is like, wow, you reached that point of whatever success as you will. And then my alternative was like do VenturePact, which is like me and and a friend from Penn, and we're just like saying like, oh, we are gonna work on this thing, and everyone was like, oh, this is obvious, right? And but then I knew that inside myself, there was like this feeling of this pull towards VenturePact. The reason was that I had worked at startups, I had invested in startups, and my co-founder had done the same. And we both realized that software was very challenging for companies. It was very hard for companies that came across a technical challenge or a technical problem to address that problem. Mainly because the supply of technical talent within a 50-mile radius of your office did not meet the demand. And therefore, they had this problem where everyone we meet would be like, how can we help? They're like, software developers, and there's this like hunger for software developers that was crazy. And so we were like, this doesn't make sense because in today's world, remote work is a lot more possible. Second of all, which means that people are going to be able to access talent outside of their city and be able to work with them. So you can work with people in your state, in the whole country, in your time zone, in the whole world. And the main challenges for that to actually work is you're going to be able to figure out how to find those people, right? I'm going to need to get a developer. I need to find, how do I find them if they're not not close to me? Second is I need to know how to screen them. Do I know they're good? Third is I'm going to need a way to match me to the person to make sure that I'm getting the right fit between our company and the other company. And the last piece is I need to know how I'm going to work with that company, right? How do I work in a remote environment? How do I manage remote teams? It's a whole different way of managing people. So if you can do those things right, you can change the way companies build software. And this was like huge for us. We're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And we'd go tell people, there's like, dude, are you crazy? Like, there's no way this is going to work out. There's so many challenges. First, finding the talent. How are you going to screen the talent? The education systems around the world are completely different. The remote work is very hard to manage remote teams. How do I promote culture and propagate culture remotely? The matching process is going to be disastrous because how do you validate what people say and on what basis are you making matching? It's not going to work. And that's kind of the feedback we get. And they're like, Silver Lake is going to be well paid. You can guarantee the money, blah, 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 blah. And so that's kind of like, I was like, but like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do VenturePact. And they're like, you're crazy. And so then I was like, okay, I need to come up with a way to explain to people why I'm making the decision beyond me just talking about like why VenturePact seems very interesting to me, because to them it wasn't as interesting as it was to me. And it's just like a difference of perspective, right? So you kind of see the problem and you kind of get excited about it, but and you think your solution makes sense. To other people, they think that there's a low probability of that solution actually to work, which is probably true. I mean, there is a low probability of that to succeed. So I was like, okay, I am not optimizing my decision based on short-term cash flows. If I was optimizing my decision on the short-term cash I would make for the next 2-3 years, then it would make sense for me to go with Silver Lake, which, by the way, I had a great experience with. It was a great company. So there was nothing wrong with Silver Lake. I would have probably gone back if I didn't have VenturePact. But I was doing VenturePact, and I was like, what matters to me is to learn and to optimize my long-term learning, which means that if I do VenturePact, I'm going to learn a lot more. Just by working on part-time, I've learned so much about the law and accounting and finance and managing expectations and contracts and working with clients and building software that I would not have learned if I'm doing the standard job the standard job at Silver Lake. So I was like, that's the first thing. The second thing I did was I watched a video by Jeff Bezos, and he talks about regret minimization framework. He says that when you make a decision, instead of thinking about your decision now as someone looking today at the next step, think of your decision as an 80-year-old looking back at your life, and your goal is to minimize the regret that you would have as an 80-year-old looking back, right? So if I'm 80 years old and looking back at my decision, I would always regret not doing VenturePact. I would regret that. I'd be like, what would have happened if I did it? So if I was to minimize my regret, I would say, oh, I'm going to do VenturePact. And as an 80-year-old, you look back at your life and you realize that if VenturePact failed, probably the world would not end. I would figure out some way to get myself back on my feet. So you change the way you perceive risk by looking at that, by using that framework. And that's very interesting. And it kind of appealed to me because I realized that, if you look back today at when you were in high school and you looked at a test that you took, some test, just choose a test at random, and you would say like, oh, that actually was not that important. But if you think about that test from the perspective of yourself 1 hour before the exam, you are like going through your notebooks like, oh my God, this is so important, and like my life is going to depend on this test, and this is going to be like amazing, and then after the test, you mess up on a problem, and you're just like going crazy about, I can't believe I messed up on that test. And now you look back and you're like, I don't even know what that test was. That didn't even matter, right? And so you change the way in which you perceive things by changing the time at which you look at things. And I think that is what we end up doing is we always overestimate the risk of the decisions we're making. We always think that what we're going to do in the next 2 years, if we do banking, right, and then we get to private equity, that's the way to go. Like, that's the structure. And it's not, I don't want to say that everyone should do startups, everyone should do technology. I just want to say that you should be more open to these decisions and opportunities that come when they're available, as opposed to thinking that you just have to follow the standard route. And I know it's hard because you come into Wharton and you just see the lines of people outside these rooms in these suits, and you're like, what are you waiting in line for? They're like, oh, this bank is here. This consulting firm is here. You're like, oh my God, I got to wait in line here. I'm not wearing a suit, and you wait in line, and you go inside, and they talk about, we travel in these jets with CEOs, and we talk to the CEO in person, and we learn about this company, and it's great. And but there is a lot. If you look at it from a learning standpoint, there is a big difference in learning and culture and environment. And so when you're making these decisions, I really think you should be thinking more about teams and how much you can learn than about what other people perceive of that role in that job.